Hey, what's up, guys? You're listening to episode 17 of the Today's Eden podcast. This is where the struggles are real, the callings are heavy, the kids are sticky. We come together because it takes a village, and this is your tribe. I had such a fun time talking with Lisen, and oh my gosh, I love her spirit, her enthusiasm. And we talked about motherhood and your career. Basically, any reason that we would need to pause in life because, life happens. And there are times when we want to pursue a passion, or we need to take care of a family member, or we want to be at home with our toddlers. And that those pauses don't last a lifetime, and they also don't have to ruin your career or the desire to start a career. Just lots of good conversation about how to trailblaze your way through this thing that we call life. Hey, Lisen, thank you so much for being on the Today's Eden podcast today. I'm so excited to talk with you about your book and your message and just kind of dig deep into that today.
Oh, Ashley, I'm so thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me.
So before we dig into the book, I work, pause, thrive. Let me say that before we even, go on. But before we dig into your book, I want all the women listening to get a feel for who you are and kind of where you're coming from. So could you give us an idea of who Lisen is and also what brought you to write such a book?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a mom of three. My kids are a little older. They're kind of college age, which I'm telling all the listeners out there, your podcast listeners, that it's awesome.
Yeah.
This is the other side of the chaos, and that this is kind of the end of the rainbow, if you will,
right.
Or maybe the beginning of a new one. It's really great to be at this phase when your kids are launched and you're just feeling really like, wow, I did that. Check that box. So that's really cool. I've been married for 30 years. So I'm going to be celebrating my 30th anniversary this summer with my husband, which is so cool. We met in college, which is really great.
Oh, well, congratulations.
And I know. Thank you. And my day job when I'm not writing, work, pause, thrive, how to pause or parent without killing your career, is I am the COO of the 3% movement. We're focused on trying to advance women into leadership in the advertising industry because sadly, the advertising industry, like so many industries, is really suffering with not having women in leadership. So we're doing our best to make that change. So
is that sort of the same kind of leeway into what made you write this book? Was your No. Oh, okay. Actually, you know what? No, thank you for asking that question. So here's the truth. I wrote this book for you and all of your listeners. And really, I wrote it for Lisen's 30-year-old self. And the reason I wrote it is because when I was 30, I was so committed to my career. I had just gotten my MBA. I was a brand manager at Nestle. I was rocking my career. I mean, I was going for it. Mm-hmm. And of course, everyone around me was saying, well, are you going to have kids? What's going on? You're going to be a parent? What's going on? And it just wasn't in my radar. And then I got unexpectedly pregnant and lost the baby. I had a miscarriage, but it was fairly early on. I was about 7 weeks along. And literally, I'm telling you, Ashley, for the first time, I was like, maybe I do want this. Maybe I do want to be a mom. And it's like totally like, wait a minute. And as a result of that, ultimately I did get pregnant and I had my first. He ended up, I like to tell the story. I don't like to tell the story. It was actually horrible. I woke up in a pool of blood on November 13th, 1993. I was 5 months pregnant. My husband and I were camping. Oh my gosh. And it was awful. And come to find out that I have a kind of a uterine anomaly, which meant that pregnancy was really hard. He ended up coming. I didn't lose a baby then, but he ended up coming 6 weeks early and spent, the first weeks of his life in the ICU. It was really troubling. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, that didn't stop me from racing back to my career and continuing to try and rock it, right? Then it was the second baby. I was on 4 months with my daughter, 4 months of bed rest with my daughter. And that's really kind of the first pause, as I like to say, that had me stop and say, well, what does really a rich, full, meaningful life mean to you or to me? And I realized that to me, it really meant being a great mom and having a great career. And of course, how do you do that, right? That's the big question. Right. And, here I am 20 odd years later going, oh, you know what? At the time, I didn't realize it, but at the time, you can figure it out. You can work it out and it can be done. It's not obvious when you're in the thick of it and there are sacrifices to be made, but
being on the other side of that, I wanted to be able to tell the story of what I knew to be true, which is it is possible. And that, in fact, women, my generation, Gen X women, kind of, I'm on the older side of Gen X, we're rocking it. We completely trailblazed, completely innovated, because the workplace sucks, by the way, in America for working moms. So we're just like trailblazing these solutions, but we're not talking about them. We're not telling anyone. And that's what I wanted to write about. I wanted to get these stories out there. So you and your sisterhood of other millennial women and men, by the way, let's be clear, we can talk about that at length. Know that there's a path. Know that there are ways to make this happen.
Right. And so in your book, you had mentioned that we should be able to live the life we want, one in which you can build a career and a family. And you did lots of research, and it was really interesting to me. But I wanted to ask you to share your findings on why it used to be that your career would essentially be over when you decided to have kids, and how come the numbers are showing that we in our workplaces actually need to consider that you can do both and it doesn't end after you have a baby.
It's really dismaying. So here, I sort of feel like I was, what is it, Groundhog Day or whatever, right. 20 years ago. I went down, come up, it's the same, down, come up, it's right. The same. Literally 20 years later, and nothing has changed in the workplace. And I'm not joking, really little has changed. Now we're starting to see changes, and we can talk about that in a minute. But I was astounded when I interviewed 186 women, surveyed 1,500 more, and interviewed a lot of men to understand kind of what's happening in the workplace and what's going on. Mm-hmm. And I came to realize that the American workplace is structured around what we call the ideal worker. And I think you know who that is, right? Mm-hmm. It's typically a guy. He's available 24/7. If he has a family at home, he's got that, perfect wife taking care of everything for him, right?
Right.
Which was really cool in the 1950s. Totally fine. Economically, it worked, everything, right? Not so great in 2017.
Right.
We all, in order to support families, most of us have to have two career couples, right? Mm-hmm. And if that is, of course, assuming we're lucky enough to have a partner, right? A lot of single moms don't have these options. But the workplace hasn't changed. And sadly, neither have our public policies. So I did a lot of comparing other countries to our country, and I was astounded to learn that female workforce participation in the U.S. has completely stagnated. In other words, for the past 20 plus years, we've been at about 74% of women in the workplace. Mm. Almost every other major industrialized country has completely surpassed us. They're in the 80s to 90%. And why is that? Well, if you actually ask the World Bank, you ask the OECD, you ask kind of every major United Nations, every major institution what their opinion is on, they've done tons of research on this. Every one of them say it's because the United States has such awful policies supporting families. Mm-hmm. It's just it ends up lands on women's shoulders, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, as much as we want men who are true partners, at the end of the day, it still lands on the women's shoulders right now. And that might change with millennials. I love you guys, but it's not changed yet. We're one of the only industrialized countries. We're one of two countries in the UN of 185 countries that do not provide paid maternity leave. How the hell could that be? Yeah. Papua New Guinea is the other one. The U.S. and Papua New Guinea. No disrespect to Papua New Guinea. Right? It's kind of laughable if it's not heartbreaking.
Yeah, comparing us to them. I mean, come on, you think we could do better? But I wanted to talk about those numbers a little bit later, because I watched one of your lectures, I believe it was at Berkeley, and you had talked about those numbers in our comparisons to other countries, and I was just mind blown. But before we get to that, so who pauses, and why do they pause?
So it's a really great question. To back it up, what I had done is I had known in my immediate circle of college-educated women who were professionally minded. I kind of, there are women who want to be stay-at-home moms, and there's no disrespect for that. I totally honor that path.
Right.
But I was looking at professionally driven women, so college-educated women who are kind of committed to their careers, and I was fascinating in my interviews that so many of them had actually secretly downshifted or paused their careers and then re-engaged. And even in their own stories to themselves, many of them actually denied their own pauses, which I thought was fascinating. So I spoke to one woman, actually I spoke to a number of women who had downshifted for a year, left the paid workforce, and then relaunched to great success. They viewed themselves and really had a lot of passion around being kind of working moms, if you will. But in fact, if you deconstructed their career path, oh yeah, that year we went and lived in Hawaii. I'm like, isn't that a pause? Oh, I guess you could call it a pause. Yeah. Or, and meanwhile, she's, number 8 at one of these really awesome startups in Silicon Valley, and she just made tons of money kind of thing, right? I'm like, right. Well, I think if we actually look at your career path, you did pause. You're right, I did. And I heard that story again and again. It was like, these women were privately trailblazing their own paths, privately figuring it out, but not recognizing their patterns were something that we could learn from.
Right.
So the question to who pauses, the research in my survey, I was astounded to learn that 72% of the women actually paused. Now, these are women who viewed themselves as very ambitious. So it wasn't women who lacked ambition.
Yeah.
So the answer is the majority of women pause in some way, shape, or form by either completely leaving the paid workforce or downshifting to reduced hours in some way. Maybe taking Fridays off, maybe, working part-time for a number of years. The vast majority of women do this for a period of time in their lives that I interviewed and surveyed. To me, that was astounding. Do you ever hear that story? No. I mean, when you hear about women's career, right? We don't hear that story.
No, you kind of hear that either they were just all working or not at all. Like you right. know what I mean? There's no in-between
middle ground.
Story. Yeah.
There's no middle ground.
So with that in mind, should we be choosing a career that will allow for a pause? Like at the very beginning when we're out of college, say if we have teenagers, or if you're a millennial listening and you're, finishing up college and you're thinking about, doing XYZ, is that something that we need to go into a career with in mind that like this, I plan on a pause, or so how can we plan to be proactive for that?
Smart. That's a really great question. My take on it is when we're unencumbered by children, and I mean children, I love them, obviously, don't get me wrong.
Right.
But before we have kids, I think you just need to go for it. Whatever that is, be it a teacher who has more flexible hours, or, engineer who's going to rock it in a startup or whatever it is. My feeling is when you don't have caregiving responsibilities in your face every day, you should just go for what you love. And then when that comes to you, then the question is, okay, actually what I've had a number of young women do is say, okay, I'm now in my early 30s. I want to be at a company that will support me to actually have an integrated life. So what I'm seeing is women from 20 to 30 or, early 30s, just rocking it in their career, going for it, whatever that looks like, being all in. And then as they're preparing to become parents, looking around and figuring out where can I set myself up for success in those early years? And look, companies right now are desperate for great talent, and particularly for great female talent. So getting yourself set up in a company that actually says that they're committed. Now, not, every situation's different, but if they've got policies, they've got paid maternity leave, paid paternity leave, talk about on-ramping after career, after you've had a child. I mean, are really kind of forward thinking around this stuff. And there are companies out there. There's more and more companies out there. That's a way to set yourself up for success, because then they've already baked in the idea that they want to keep you after you've had a baby. Right. And so you can actually set yourself up for success that way. Now, of course, every situation is different. You might be in a company that doesn't have that, but have a boss that's just going to work with you like crazy to support you. Or you might be a company that does have that, and you've got a jerk for a boss who's not going to support you. So it's kind of, right? So you just need to really be conscious. I didn't do that. I kind of just thought I could muscle through. And I didn't look at the environment around me. And so many of the women I interviewed also didn't. They didn't look at the environment around you and realize that we're operating in a construct, right? Yes, we are wonderful people and we can achieve our dreams and all that great stuff, But it's hard to do it if you're not in an environment that actually can allow you to thrive. And that was a real takeaway for me. In fact, the 28% of women who never paused their careers, Ashley, these were women who actually had workplaces that supported them. They found that their workplace supported them, or I should say, they had stay-at-home partners. So a number of the women who never paused actually had partners who had careers that took second fiddle to their careers. So those were sort of two things that I saw in the dynamic for the women who never paused their careers.
So maybe this is actually a conversation that we need to be having with our employers and also our spouses or partners.
Oh, no question. And in fact, it's interesting. What I found fascinating is the millennial men I interviewed. So many of them told me, oh my God, I never thought I'd be stuck as this provider role. I mean, one guy I spoke to was so great. His name's Heath Black. He's awesome. He's like, my wife is far smarter than I am. She did better in school and I'm suddenly the provider. How did that happen? And he wasn't criticizing her. That was what made sense for their family, right? But the point being is that the guys don't want to be these big providers either. I mean, some of them do, but they're marrying who's the best educated American right now? Millennial women. 60% of graduates from college last year were millennial women. I'm telling you, the workplace needs us. We've got great skills. You guys need to get out there and rock it. And your smart partners are going to recognize that. So here's one thing I learned, which I actually discovered. My husband and I had been doing that without even knowing we were doing it, which is I interviewed a number of couples who actually were spiraling their career. One of them would say, okay, I've got this huge opportunity. And the other one would say, great, you go for it. I'll take up the slack at home. I'll take up the slack with the kids. I'll downshift a little bit for this time. And then they'd flip. Then they'd be like, okay, your turn. You go for it. It's your turn to go for it. And I'll be the one who downshifts. I thought that was really inspiring. And of course, you don't know that until you're farther along in your marriage and your career to say, hey, that's what we've just done. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, I had no idea. Actually, that's similar to what my husband and I did, but I didn't realize it until reading your book that he, like the same way that you just said, he was in the car business working like 90-hour weeks, like crazy, insane. Could hardly see our kids. His days off weren't, together. And so it was really taking a toll on him as our kids got older. And then our daughter, she would say things that would just really break his heart because he was gone all the time. And so, then it was to a point where he was really unhappy, but he felt like he had to be that sole provider. And so then we had to be real with each other, have a conversation, and I could really see that he had a desire to be home more, to spend more time with his kids. And I wanted our kids to have that from him as well. And so honestly, we were just kind of like, okay, what are we willing to give up to make this happen? And so he left his job. And then there was a few months where he was trying to figure out what he was going to do. And so in those few months, I went back to work and I went back to work. I didn't necessarily love it, but I went back to work, and it was interesting because I had always thought when I was first, pregnant and then raising a kid, I had always had this desire because I was in college before that, and I had a dream that I was missing out on this, career, this thing that I thought that I was supposed to do. So here I am back at work. He's trying to figure out what he wants to do. And then it comes to the end of my time for working, and I realized that, wow, that's really not what I wanted to do. I don't want to work a lot of hours. I don't want to be in an office. And then I realized I had this passion for basically this podcast. And so then we switched. So then he went into real estate actually, and then I started this podcast. And so now we kind of work together. So when he knows I have an interview, if the kids are going to be home, he says, okay, so he has that freedom to say, okay, I will take them here. You can have that space. And they won't bother you. And then we'll come back and, we'll do this. I have a showing here. Can you help me with the kids then? And so that's kind of what our dynamic is now.
I love it. So this is what is so inspiring to me. I'm seeing so many great couples be really conscious about co-creating careers and co-creating family in a way that frankly wasn't always available to my generation. And I actually have to give credit to the men. Millennial men are really, my husband, I say to my husband, I jokingly say, honey, you just always were a millennial. They're just trying to catch up with you. Because millennial men are really passionate about being engaged and in terms of just spending time with their kids. And I don't, they're like, want to be there. They don't want to just dump this off on their wives necessarily, or partners. And I think that's where real change is going to happen, right? When actually men are sitting there going, wow, this is really hard. I want to support my partner. I just spoke here. You're going to love this. I just spoke at the Naval Academy to 250 cadets, the vast majority of who were men. And every single one of them are like, oh my God, I want to be a great partner. I want to be a great dad. I want my partner to have a great career. How can I do this? They were as eager for the message of work, pause, thrive as the women were.
Right.
And that to me is huge, right? That to me says we've got a real sea change going on here. Something is different. And we have an opportunity to really make change in our society in terms of public policies, in our society in terms of how we treat each other as we're navigating this. The whole mommy wars thing. I'm hoping that just goes away. Yeah. Right. Because it's not going to be about that. It's going to be how can we support our families? And of course, workplace too. Let's get some workplace support.
Right. Definitely. Yeah. I remember my husband was watching the video with me of you speaking at Berkeley. And I think it was something that he had said about millennial husbands, quickly and in your speech, and he like fist bumped me like, yeah. So
I love it.
Yeah. So, but so so when you do decide to have a pause, pausing looks different for everybody. And you kind of talk about that there are different paths from coming off a pause. So could you talk about what those are, just so women don't necessarily think that a pause has to be one particular thing? Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for asking that. So here's what's really amazing to me. I ended up finding out from my research and the survey that there were almost 3 paths to pausing. And it was interesting also is that women often kind of jumped across paths. So I don't mean to say that there's just one direct path. I want to be really clear on that, right? But here are kind of the 3 ways I saw people doing it. The one way is what I called cruisers. These are women who actually stayed working. They never quit working full time, but they downshifted. They literally reduced their hours and really kind of, I like to say if you look at a stove, they put the career pot in the back and they put the kid pot or the family pot in front, but they were still on the stove. They were still cooking, right? So here's the deal. Those cruisers, a couple of them had really great situations where their employers made it happen. So I think, for example, of a woman I did, I surveyed her or interviewed, her name was Lisa Williamson. She was at Wells Fargo. When she had 3 young kids under the age of 5. She kind of raised the flag to her boss and to Wells Fargo and said, I can't do this. I'm quitting. And they said back to her, do not do that. We're going to create an opportunity for you. We're going to let you work part-time. We're going to make this happen. She ended up doing that for a number of years. I can't really think of 3 or 4 years, 5 years maybe. And then when her kids got into elementary school or, whatever, farther along, then they said, we want to have you back. We have a great opportunity. And she did go back full time with them. And she's now an executive vice president, one of the most senior women there. She's rocking it. Yeah. And she was able to do it because her employer said, we really want to invest in your long-term talent. We want to be there for you. And I heard that again and again and again. So cruisers were lucky enough to have negotiated those deals with their companies. And it may have been just with their boss. I had one woman who I interviewed. This is hilarious. Actually, she and I went to college together. And we were quite friendly. And she'd had this amazing career in the luxury good business. And unbeknownst to me, she had worked 10 years working part-time, 3 days a week. But she and her boss had negotiated it so that no one knew she wasn't working those other 2 days. They kind of just kept it quiet. I thought, that's amazing. How did you do that? And they just navigated this way to do it so that it worked for them. So those were the cruisers. The second group are what I call the boomerangs. And they're the ones we kind of read about as they're the ones who completely leave the paid workforce. They are out for a number of years and then they relaunch, but it's really hard to relaunch or harder to relaunch because they're going back to the same job, the same industry, the same kind of career path. So I was a computer software engineer. I'm in Silicon Valley, so those are the references I use. But I was in, a computer software engineer, and now I want to get back in. And they're the ones who struggle the most because getting back into exactly what you were in, you recognize that if you'd stayed in, you would have been higher up the ladder. You recognize that your salary is not as much. And oftentimes there is motherhood bias in the workplaces. And they say, well, you used to be an engineer, but everything's changed and you can't do it anymore, which is just total malarkey.
Right.
That's the nice way of saying it. So what's really cool that's happening is some really smart companies are doing something called a return to work internship. for women who've paused, and men who've downshifted or who've paused their careers and want to relaunch. And these return to work internships are happening all across almost every industry. It's happening in advertising and financial services and high tech. I mean, we're seeing it all, consulting and all over. And this, I think, is a really great new trend that we're seeing where companies are saying, okay, we want this mid-career talent back again. We know she's smart as hell. We know that she's just basically run the entire PTA and damn it, she can apply those skills or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
And so that to me is really inspiring to see. So those are the boomerangs. And the last group are the people I call the pivoters. These are women who downshifted or completely paused their career. They left the paid workforce and they took the time to figure out what is it they really want to do. Some of them became entrepreneurs. Some of them actually completely changed careers. I spoke to one woman, Marianne Perrin. She was in finance and operations. She shifted and now she's a professor of nutritional science at the University of North Carolina. I mean, real complete shifts. One woman, she just got $3 million in venture funding for her startup, and she's now building a beverage company, a medicinal beverage company. She was at Coke, and she's kind of in the same industry. But, I mean, just some inspiring stories. I left being a marketer, and I became a journalist. And now, of course, I'm back consulting and working in the marketing field. But the point being that there's these pivots that happen. And those were the women I found really inspiring as well, because they are the ones who took the time to really figure out what does this life give me? What is true success for me? And we're willing to completely say, I'm taking the risk, I'm going for it, whatever that looks like. They were the ones who actually had the highest tolerance for risk. They were just willing to go for it and figure it out. But it was more risky, right? So some of them had great success and others really struggled. They couldn't quite figure out how to do it. And so that was the path. So those are the three key paths that I saw.
But, and I so love that in your book, you had said something that really kind of struck me, and I've never heard somebody put it this way. You said, working mother and stay-at-home mom are terms that don't truly speak to the give and take of our realities. And I'm like, yes.
Right?
Yeah. And then you talked about, I can't remember if it was in your book or something that I'd heard, but you had talked about leaving a blank space on a resume. And I feel like it's because we feel like stay-at-home mom isn't valued enough to be on your resume, which is so untrue. So I want to ask you what your opinion would be. What would you put, what would a pause look like on a resume? What would you put down if you're a woman my age who paused and then is going back out there? What would you do?
Well, let's be honest. I'm just going to call it like it is.
Right.
The workplace still really has bias against people who are not in the paid workplace. So, for example, if you've lost your job and you're job hunting, there's tons of research that shows, 6 months, a year, and the employers are like, oh, something's wrong with that person, right? So you've got quote unquote what they call long-term, quote unquote, long-term employment bias, right? Then you've got motherhood bias, where people think, oh, well, mothers, they're not really committed to their careers, so blah blah blah. And then, you've got flexibility bias, because a lot of women who want to relaunch are trying to manage time. So you've got all of these things happening. But here's two trends that are happening that I think are really great and actually help us. One is that we're seeing the gig worker, people who don't have the linear careers, but actually work for a period of time here, work for a period of time there, work freelance. So we're seeing more and more of that. So when women ask me kind of what do I do, my answer back is, I think you basically don't talk about your pause. Instead, you basically claim whatever you did as work. They don't need to know whether it was paid or not. So I'm assuming you're being paid millions of dollars for your podcast, and you should be, by the way, because it's awesome. But let's just say you're not. You can still put down launched and ran podcast, reach these many women, da-da-da. I think what I encourage women to do is to get away from the money aspect and get to the work aspect. So let's say you ran, hey, look, I'm an alpha female, of course. I was a PTA president, of course. And I ended up running and raising, tons of money for our school district, launched all these new programs. I put that on my resume, right? I was willing to say, I did this and this is what I did. It was a leadership position. We raised this, we implemented these programs. And smart employers understand that talent, whether it's paid or not, is about building skills, about leadership, about all these things. It's hard to actually apply through one of these god-awful, online application systems. Yeah. So one woman, for example, I interviewed, she wanted to work at Google. Mm-hmm. She saw a great job online. She applied online, didn't get a call back. Mm. And then she worked the system and spoke to someone she knew who worked there. He helped her redraft her resume to get rid of the pauses and to make it less obvious that she had paused. She resubmitted it that way, and then he also end-runded it and brought it into the boss that was hiring and said, "This is a rock star." And it was the person-to-person contact that made the difference. Wow. So that's the other thing I learned, is that very few women found jobs online. It was their network that mattered. So if there's any headline news takeaway, maintain and build your network, whether you're in the workforce or not, paid workforce or not. That would be the big headline. Just keep building that network, get out there, go to conferences, go to things, stay engaged in your career, always nurture your career, whether you're getting paid or not. That's my takeaway.
Yeah. And I think the big thing is the realization that what you do is huge in and out of the workplace. So just like you said, leader, PTA president, those take amazing skills to be able to fundraise and to organize and to, find sponsors. And obviously, like you said, those are things that are valuable to lots of different career paths or, workplaces. And so I think that another thing that women need to do is to really see their skills as valuable instead of just, yes, oh, that's just something that I do. Well, no, you managed to have 3 kids and get them all to ABC places at XYZ time. And,
It's so, Ashley, I couldn't agree more. We have such a bias in our country around paid work as being what's meaningful. And and you'll read it in the book, what I learned when I was doing research, public policy research about Work, Pause, Thrive, was that we actually have embedded in our in our public policies a system that actually penalizes people who aren't paid for caregiving and aren't paid for volunteer work. Mm. Other countries actually include that in their GDP, their gross domestic product. We don't. Mm. And so we're undervaluing the amount of work that gets done in this culture. We undervalue the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of hours of volunteer work in our schools, right? So our school system functions, as we know, because of all those volunteer paid hours, but we don't account for that. So we women and men need to own unpaid work as valuable, meaningful work, because it is.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think that's something, just like you said, instead of, I guess, just thinking about your resume differently, and that you don't have to put stay-at-home mom there, but really break down what did you do during that time, and how could that be valuable to who you're applying to in a different sort of way.
That's exactly right. What was really interesting, there's a research that just came out of Vanderbilt University. It came out about a year ago. And what they did was they studied, when someone was more authentic and during interviews, more authentic about their pauses and their breaks. And what they found is that people who were authentic to themselves and owned their truth, owned their decision-making, owned their path, said, yeah, I paused my career for 3 years, 5 years, whatever it was, because I really wanted to focus on my young kids. I was able to launch them. Now I'm really excited to do this. And while I paused, by the way, I was PTA president or whatever it is, right? Mm-hmm. I launched a podcast and ran this and did all that. When we own our pauses, when we own our truth, employers love it. Mm. It was I can't remember the exact statistics, but it was double or triple the number of job opportunities and job acceptances, job offers, as a result of just owning our truth. Yeah. So instead of apologizing for it, let's own what we're doing. And let's say, this is my path. This is what was true for me. This was what was right at the time. I'm now ready for a new opportunity. And here's what I can bring. And just own it. Let's own it, ladies.
Right. Yeah.
That's my take.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that reminds me of I think it was a blog post or something that I had seen gone viral on Facebook or something, but it was a husband who wrote about his wife, and it was titled, Why I Can't Afford for My Wife to Stay Home. And then he broke down basically everything that we feel is the mundane and the things that we just do because we do them, and actually put a price and a value to everything that she does in the daily. And it was just so awesome and so edifying. And, yeah, so he's probably one of your millennial men that also...
Exactly. He's rocking it. We love him.
Yeah.
More of that, please.
But I wanted to kind of give women some hope about that there, like you said, that there is kind of a turn happening, and there's proof that some companies do value that a life of a woman does not always stay linear. And in your book, you wrote about Netflix. Offering employees a full year, a full year of paid paternal leave. Am I right? Yeah.
Yes, parental leave, so men and women can take it. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's awesome. And then you said Microsoft giving a full paid leave of 12 weeks to both men and women, and that is awesome. And I know
we're seeing more of that. More and more companies are doing that.
Yeah, and that's smart because, and I know I had a friend that was from Canada, and she said even there you get like a year off, full paid, and then you're welcome back. And in those places, just like you had said in your presentation at Berkeley, if we were on pace with other countries, our economy would be 11% stronger. And that to me is insane, and I don't understand why we wouldn't do that. So,
right? Yeah. I mean, when you think about it, look, women make between 75 and 85% of the purchasing decisions in this country. That means cars, houses, all of these things. These are the women who are driving these decisions, right? So we've got women who are doing that, and yet we're not necessarily paying them to be in the workplace. That doesn't seem like a smart connect, right? Right. So I think that our economy at the end of the day, I like to joke we're fish swimming in dirty water and we don't even know water is there. Yeah. And when I talk to my peers, my colleagues in other countries, they're just astounded at how we treat new parents, the lack of support to new parents in this country, and the lack of childcare, high quality childcare. It's not something to be proud of how we treat families in our country. No, it's just not.
Yeah, definitely. I know that that's one of the big factors that women decide to stay home in the first place, is because it just makes sense to stay at home when childcare is so stinking expensive.
Well, and couple that with millennial women have more student debt than any other generation ever before them.
True. Yeah, that's
so true. I interviewed so many millennial women who said, I want to be working full time. I can't, because I can't afford childcare and student loans, and I can't forgo my student loans. So what has to give? Childcare. So they're forced to stay home, even though they're best educated, because of student loans. Something's really wrong with that.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to take a moment before we have to get off and just acknowledge that you're awesome for writing this book. Thank you
for reading it.
Yeah, thank you for putting it out there, and for kind of giving us a different way at looking at things. That there isn't just one option. That it can be both and just the information, the facts, the encouragement. It's amazing. So I'm glad that you're doing what you're doing.
Oh, Ashley, you rock. Here's the thing. I felt so alone when I went through my journey. I mean, honestly, I felt so isolated. I felt there was something wrong with me. I couldn't hack it. I couldn't do this. And my wish is that you and millennial women like you know that you're not alone, and that we can create community around supporting each other. Because I think once we do that, the world changes when we're out there supporting each other, saying, hey, you're at this phase? Okay, great. Well, when you're ready to transfer to this phase, let me help you, or whatever it looks like, right?
Totally.
Imagine, right? I saw that again and again, is women who were in the paid workforce saying, hey, let me give you a leg up. I know somebody. Let me take your resume. Let me support you. And women who were at home saying, you're in the paid workforce, sister mother. Let me help you with your kids, et cetera. When we can actually co-parent and create careers like that, that's real community to me. And that's where real change happens, right?
Yeah, totally. Just like that. It takes a village mindset that I'm trying to put out there, but
I love it. I love it.
So before we get off, I wanted to ask you the 3 questions that I've asked all my guests on the show. And the first one being, what is the most influential book that you've read?
Oh gosh, that's really hard to ask a writer. You know what? I'm gonna invite your readers to read, before the show comes up, Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale. Okay. And it's a fictional book, and I recommend it. It was written in the 1980s, and at the time that she wrote it, I thought she was crazy. She's a Canadian author, Margaret Atwood. But what's scary to me is that so many of the things and the ways that we treat women in our society and what we're happening this is a dystopian future that isn't that far away, and it's much closer than I think we realize. So I would recommend reading that book as a fictional book. Of course, they have to read Work, Pause, Thrive, How to Pause for Parenthood Without Killing Your Career. And there's another book that I love for men called All In by Josh Levs. It's about what men and millennial men can do to be really engaged dads and how they can support the workplace. So it's almost, I like to call it my brother book. So if you've got Work, Pause, Thrive, and you've got All In, that's a really complete story about how men and women and communities and workplaces and our public policies can change. So, of course, besides Work, Pause, Thrive, there are two books to consider that I think will be your readers might love, or your listeners might love.
I'm like, that would make you an awesome couple if you're just both side by side reading those books.
Seriously,
if you could empower women in one way, what would it be?
Oh gosh, I'm just thinking of Superman. I'm like looking at Superman superpowers. I believe that one of the things that I suffer from, I can't speak for everyone, is not, confidence is such a loaded word, but it's belief that my path is right and true for me, and that's okay for me. Yes. And I hate to use the word confidence because it's so loaded, but if I truly believe that what I was doing is right for me, and if I truly had faith that and had faith in my gut and my intuition, so much of my worry and my anxiety and my fear would have gone away, right? If I could have said, Lisen, you'll be here at 50 plus, right? And this is all good, to my 30-year-old self, oh my God, what a gift it would have been, right? And so I wish that for women, because I think we do give ourselves a hard time, and more though than it seems that men do. And I just wish we could give ourselves a break and really have faith that our path is the right path for us to get in touch with that path, right? We need to be conscious around that path, and then believe in ourselves. I know that sounds very foofy, but there you have it.
No, that's good. And that's actually something that my husband reminds me of when I'm doing something and I compare myself to somebody else or who I think is more successful or that. And then he's like, if he just reminds me that he's like, well, if what you're doing, would you still do it if 100 people stop listening to you tomorrow? And then if my answer is yes, then do it. It doesn't matter if you feel that passionate about it, then you should be doing it despite what you think others think about you or what they in fact think about you. And then just owning your own path and your passions and having the faith that, like you said, it'll unfold in the way it's supposed to unfold.
I love your husband. He sounds like a total keeper.
Yes, he definitely is. So that brings me to the same question, which you kind of answered, was if you could tell your younger self one thing, assuming that she would listen, what would it be?
I actually like to take it out to my 80-year-old self because I like to go way ahead. Yeah. I did this really wonderful. Here's the third book the group has to read. Have you ever heard of Playing Big by Tara Sophia Moore?
I don't think so.
Oh, listeners, read that one. That's another great book. Tara is a wonderful woman who focuses on helping women really play big in their life. Mm-hmm. And she has this wonderful exercise called, your inner mentor. Mm. And she asks you to take yourself to the future, what I call my 80-year-old self. And she asks your 80-year-old self, what does what do you wish you had done? What have you done? Where are you? And so she takes you on this journey. And I love it because my 80-year-old self is the same as my 50-year-old self, which is what I wish my 30-year-old self knew, which is if in fact you're true to your own journey, if in fact you're attentive to what really inspires, motivates, and is true for you. And that means your career, your personal life, whatever. If you're attentive to that and honoring that, it will unfold. It doesn't mean it's always going to be easy. Oh my God, my husband and I spent years, in struggling in our marriage. Yeah. My kids, was struggling as I was trying to have a career and raise my kids and do all that. I mean, I was struggling to figure all this out. So I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but I am going to say that if you're attentive to yourself and your truth, that it makes it easier, if you will. Yeah. And that's the gift I wish I could give my 30-year-old self, is to be more present with what's true and more conscious of what's true, and then have faith that this too shall pass, and this is part of life, and that you can do it. You are resilient, and you can do it.
Oh, that's so good. And you're super inspiring. That's awesome. Yes.
Right back at you.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time out to hang out with me and talk about these things. And yeah, I'm so excited to put this out there and share your knowledge and your advice and your wisdom with others. So thank you so much.
Oh, Ashley, it's an absolute privilege. Thank you for having me.
I hope you guys enjoyed that episode and that you found it helpful. I just wanted to support all my working moms out there, my soon-to-be moms, my really anything that you are. I wanted to give you a space to realize that we don't all have to have the same path, that there are many different paths, but not to give up because you feel like nobody else is going that route or everybody else is doing something different, just to own what you want to do and to do it. So I highly encourage you to check out Lisen's book, Work, Pause, Thrive, and you can find the link to her book and to her website on the show notes page at today'seden.com/podcasts/017. That is PODCASTS/017. So I want to leave you with this quote today because I often need to hear this so much, and it's, don't feel guilty for doing what's best for you.